Welcome to Season 5 of Your Bird Story, a podcast about everyday people and their relationships and interactions with wild birds. I'm your host, Georgia Silvera Seamans. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Your Bird Story. Today I have the distinct pleasure of speaking with Bryony Angell. I mean, how would I describe Bryony? Birder, writer, cheerleader, listener, and so much more. Welcome, Bryony.
Well, thank you. That sure makes me smile.
I'm happy to have you. I think this is your second time on the podcast. The first time was about a topic related to what you call birding like a mother.
Yeah, I talked about having a birding practice while being a parent of school-age kids who are not interested in birding and how a person might manage for that.
I have a similar experiences and I learned a lot from that episode. So thanks again. So today we're going to get into birds and chocolate, which is very exciting to combine these two wonderful things. And I wonder if you could define for folks what bird-friendly chocolate means.
Yes. Bird-friendly eco-certification is a label that has been developed by the Smithsonian Institute, and it has been applied to coffee. Some birders may be familiar with bird-friendly coffee. It's been around for about 30 years, since the late 90s. And more recently, the second agricultural commodity, cocoa, has been certified bird-friendly under the Smithsonian's rigorous standards. The certification was formally launched in February of 2023 after undergoing a pilot with Zorzal cacao of the Dominican Republic. And they are a producer, not a chocolate maker. They grow cocoa there in the Dominican Republic, which is representative of the tropics where cocoa is grown. And like coffee, cocoa can be produced in an agroforestry model, which can allow for a concurrent biodiversity success as well as a profitable farming enterprise. So coffee and cocoa are unique in this way that they can sustain an existing environment while actually being in production. And this is smaller scale production for both of those commodities. You've got your more industrial coffee and cocoa are produced, at a much larger scale, often as a monocrop in full sun, no shade. So cocoa and coffee that are bird certified are pretty special and tend to be more specialty. But they're now out there. You can start to look for bird-friendly certified cocoa as an ingredient in some chocolate now made in the U.S., available for retail.
You used the word agroforestry. Could you describe what that looks like on the landscape?
Yeah, so just to kind of give you a simple visual, these particular agroforestry models are applied to the tropics because that's where cocoa and coffee are grown. And I think going forward, I'll just refer to cocoa. Cocoa is grown in the kind of the middle part of our planet. Areas like the Dominican Republic is represented by Zorzal, the first producer to be certified bird-friendly. A lot of cocoa is grown in Ghana, on the Ivory Coast, in Africa, Uganda, Tanzania. There's cocoa grown in Central America and South America. And these areas are a good model for the potential of bird-friendly certification. The model of agroforestry under the bird-friendly certification is a 40% canopy cover over the crop. This is a successful model in the tropics where these particular crops can be grown in a shade-grown model. So for what a 40% canopy coverage looks like is a mix from ground to top of the canopy of native plantings as well as the crop that's being produced. It's a quite diverse landscape. If you were to, physically be standing in it, you would be seeing the crop being grown as well as native foliage and tree cover, and then that environment supports the biodiversity that is either in the surrounding area of the original farm or has been there the whole time. In the case of Zorzal, the farm in the Dominican Republic, which is the first producer to be bird certified friendly by the Smithsonian, they started out originally as a bird preserve for the Bicknell's thrush. And the folks who purchased the land for the preserve conceived of a way to support the maintenance of the preserve through growing cocoa. Cocoa growing was already present in the surrounding area. It's a mountainous region in the Dominican Republic. What was ideal about this area was that it was great habitat for the Bicknell's thrush, which is a migratory bird that comes to the East Coast during the summer, East Coast of the U.S., I should say. Getting back to the Dominican Republic, the area where the preserve is was both forested and had kind of semi-shade grown cocoa already going on. And so it was just a matter of really cinching up the best practices for starting their own cocoa production and presenting as a model for how to move forward as a agroforestry model that could sustain the biodiversity that was there. So to both grow and support conservation, grow as a business and support conservation. So there was some reforestry that went on at the Zorzal Preserve and the surrounding areas, in addition to cocoa growing.
Are there other cocoa growers aside from Zorzal with this certification?
Yes, there are. The Smithsonian Bird Friendly website has got the latest information. I'm speaking to an article that I wrote for Birdwatchers Digest. At the time of the publication, Zorzal was the only bird-friendly certified producer of cocoa. Since publication, there have been subsequent farmers that have been certified. I don't know which, but the Smithsonian's bird-friendly website would have that information.
So Zorzal seems fairly unique, right? They started out as a bird preserve. So in the case where you don't have that origin story, what's in it for growers to work towards this certification?
That's a really good question. It's a way to stand out in the market and to offer a different spin on your product. The growers of cocoa who could be bird friendly certified tend to be smaller, more kind of bespoke growers who sell to chocolatiers who sell kind of on the higher end of the chocolate retail range. It is considered fine chocolates. Often these chocolatiers are looking for a single source cocoa in order to give their products a particular terroir, like with wine grapes. In addition to having a particular regional appeal, the farmer could then add this eco-certification to their cocoa to give it an additional edge on the market. Should that appeal to the chocolatiers? The chocolatiers they're the folks that buy the cocoa. Mm-hmm. And they're the ones who can really determine whether or not there's interest in bird-friendly certified cocoa in their products, if that's important to retail customers. At this point, I think a lot of people don't know that it exists. And so, whether it's important to them or not, bird conservation, they're not even aware that there is such a thing as bird-friendly certified cocoa. At this stage, it's just getting the word out that such a thing exists. And there are 3 retailers plus, I say, it's growing every day, who produce delicious chocolates that source cocoa from bird-friendly certified growers.
Well, I learned about bird-friendly certified cocoa from you, and it sort of coincided with me seeing the Raaka, which is based in Brooklyn, New York, their pink salt bar, which uses the Zorzal cocoa. I was kind of shocked that, and maybe it's changed, that Raaka did not include anywhere on its packaging that the cocoa used was bird-friendly certified, which seems different now from a bar that Fruition is producing, which their labeling seems to more clearly call out this distinguishing feature of their chocolate bar.
I asked the same question. I say changing a label, changing the packaging of a particular bar is a behemoth enterprise, and it involves, new graphic design and this and that. A lot of these companies will place their packaging orders, a couple years worth of packaging. And because this is such a new eco certification. It's only 2 years old. We could still see it on brand packaging from Raaka in the future. We very well could see it. We're not going to see it now because they're still running through their existing packaging for their products. Some chocolatiers don't want to put any labels, any eco certification on their packaging because this is higher end chocolate. The packaging is actually, it's attractive by itself, almost like it's a wrapped gift. And to put additional labeling on it to kind of cram the back with nutritional information and all these different eco certifications sort of muddies the prettiness with the higher price point. There's pride and appearance. And, some of that communication regarding whether or not an item is bird friendly is happening on the websites. And then you're right. In the case of Fruition Chocolate, they're the first chocolate maker to put the Smithsonian bird-friendly label on their packaging. At this point, there are only 3 chocolatiers who are sourcing cocoa and producing chocolate bars that call out that cocoa specifically. And that's Raaka Chocolates, Dandelion Chocolates, and Fruition, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, since the start of the pandemic, there's just been this upswell in interest in the US and worldwide. People are flocking to bird watching, bird spotting, bird finding, your term of choice. We also have seen lots of reports about the sort of startling decline in birds overall, that downward trend since the 1970s. And this feels like a market for this chocolate just seems to be built in just with the upswing in interest in birds and birds conservation. So I really do hope these chocolatiers consider that the next time they're updating their labels. I think it could be a missed opportunity given the high interest in birds.
I totally agree with you. I mean, it's hard enough to get the word out. And then even when you do, consumers are often very literal and they're looking for the information, right up there on the website, above the fold or on the actual packaging when they turn it around and look for the organic symbol or the kosher or, if it's vegan or, all these different certifications, which consumers who care, who buy along those lines are looking for. And, how hard is it to add that bird-friendly certification of the Smithsonian Institute to a label to just make it that much more obvious? It's a work in progress. And at this stage, my interest is just telling people who the chocolatiers are. Let's start where you can put your money. You get to indulge where your dollar goes further. To me, it's a no-brainer. I love chocolate. I love birds. And I'm going to spend a little more on something special and know that it's supporting enterprise that supports conservation. And in fact, talking to some of the folks for this story that I wrote for Birdwatchers Digest, there's an observation among for-profit companies who want to do good. There's still a for-profit enterprise, and more we're seeing conservation that it's not just check writing. There's either ecotourism associated with it or, agrotourism or, in the case of Zorzal, they are growing cacao, as a way to support the preserve. So they're number one, a preserve, number two, a cocoa producing farm. More and more, we're seeing that is what it's going to take for conservation to be successful. There's got to be, it's not a pretty way to say it, but it's got to pay for itself. And this is a really easy way for consumers to both indulge in something that's delicious and feel good about it. So to me, it's just being a conscientious consumer justifies, my shopping impulses, and knowing where to put my buck for it to go further is exciting to me. So that's what I'm trying to share in writing the story and in talking to you. The possibility you can have a really awesome bar of chocolate and know that it supports bird conservation.
Yeah. You mentioned the big-nosed thrush as a species that's supported by Zorzal. Are there other migratory birds that folks in the U.S. might be familiar with that are supported by the work that Zorzal is doing?
That's a really good question. I don't know. The big-nosed thrush is the keynote speaker of this effort. I'm sure there are other species. And, I have to admit, this is my my weakness as a birder. I'm very West Coast focused. I know my West Coast migratory birds, but I mean, the East Coast migratory birds are a whole different gang of cuties. And I'm not as familiar with them to know, which ones come from the Dominican Republic and will, fly up to Vermont.
In addition to big-nosed thrush, other birds that migrate from the Dominican Republic to the east coast of the U.S. include green heron, northern mockingbird, American kestrel, and killdeer. So one of the reasons I find this so fascinating is because migratory birds are being supported by this work. And as a person who lives in a city, it's very likely that I'm seeing some of the individual birds who might be migrating from the Dominican Republic through New York City, for example, which is on the flyway. You've written a couple of articles about urban birds. I'm thinking of an interview you wrote for Audubon with David Lindo. You have the article about providing food for birds if you live in an apartment building. And I'm just curious if you have an affinity for cities because it's shown up in some of your writing.
Yes, I used to live in a city. I lived in Seattle for most of my life and only recently started living in the countryside where I am now. But for years when I was living in the city, I didn't own a car. And I walked everywhere. And so I was acutely aware of the sights and sounds around me because I wasn't in a little box. I lived in the city proper, not in the outskirts. So I wasn't reliant on a car. So I appreciated the kind of observation that someone in a more urban area like New York City for yourself or London, in the case of David Lindo, who is the urban birder. That is his name. I absolutely appreciated the approach of birding in a city. I wrote what I was experiencing at the time, as a city dweller. And I really seemed to resonate with readers, as you've pointed out. And I think more and more the populations of the world are moving towards urban dwelling. And so getting your head around possibilities of supporting or observing biodiversity in a city, the more content that's out there, like the stuff that David Lindo's writing and the pieces that I've put out, it opens people's eyes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that I'm going to be using my dollars to support these bird-friendly cocoa growers and the chocolatiers who use that cocoa to make their bars. I want to close us out by bringing us back to the cocoa. I won't ask you to choose your favorite of the chocolate bars on air, but if you have a favorite way to prepare, use some of the bars that you've had experience with. Is there a favorite recipe that you can recommend to listeners?
Yes, I'm happy to throw this out. I like making peanut butter chocolate chip cookies. Raaka is one of the companies that produces chocolate from, sourced from Zorzal. And what I like about what they offer, I'm not going to be specific about it. They have a bunch of different chocolate bars with different infusions. But what I like to use are their baking chocolate medallions. I love to bake. And those medallions are sourced from Zorzal. I would have to say that is my favorite. And that's pretty basic. It's utilitarian, but I love that Raaka has everything from fanciful, seasonal produced. For instance, at Halloween, they had these little vegan white chocolate ghosts that they made. They were so cute. And then they have, their standard fare that's available all the time. And they also produce monthly specialty, very imaginatively conceived infusions, as does Dandelion. And I think Fruition as well. I mean, they're all very creative, artisanal chocolate makers, just perusing their websites. It's an exercise. And oh my gosh, who thought of that flavor combination? I want to try that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a really inspiring experience, starting with that piece of, they make chocolate from bird-friendly cocoa, and then just diving deeper to see what an artisanal chocolate maker does and, and how far they go to satisfy your taste buds. But I guess it's a long way to answer your question. I go right to the source. I want to make my own peanut butter chocolate chip cookies, and I just like those baking medallions. Yeah.
Well, I'm a little bit envious of the people I know who are on your list who are going to receive chocolate comestibles this holiday season. I really want to thank you, Bryony, for talking about bird-friendly chocolate and how it's affecting bird conservation.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Bird Story. Tune in on the second Thursday of next month for the next episode. In the meantime, explore our archives, like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Your Bird Story is edited and produced by Pod to the People. Your Bird Story is an initiative of Local Nature Lab.